Evolution usually plays the long game, but sometimes it just gets bored and hits the delete button. Today, we're counting down the 10 dumbest ways people have ever died, and honestly, natural selection couldn't have picked a more deserving group of winners. These 10 individuals treated basic survival instincts like an optional hobby. Do not attempt any of these stunts or genius ideas at home, unless your lifelong goal is to become a cautionary tale. Welcome to the Hall of Fame of Terminal Stupidity. Let's watch exactly how they lost the race to the bottom. 1. A quiet suburban Saturday is the traditional battleground for amateur home improvement. But for a remarkably overconfident weekend warrior named Gary, it was about to become ground zero for a catastrophe. Gary possessed a thick, impenetrable layer of unearned arrogance, fueled entirely by binge-watching reality renovation shows while aggressively criticizing the licensed professionals on his screen. He firmly believed that paying a structural engineer was a personal insult to his masculinity. His current obsession was achieving the holy grail of modern real estate, the barrier-free, open-concept floor plan. Why endure the visual restriction of load-bearing walls when you can shout at your television directly from the kitchen island? Any rational human tackling the demolition of a primary partition would consult a municipal blueprint, or at least figure out what utility pipes were hiding inside the plaster. Gary, however, treated blueprints exactly like the lengthy terms and conditions of a software update, aggressively ignoring the warnings to get straight to the destructive fun. Armed with a rented, heavy-duty industrial demolition saw designed for slicing through reinforced highway asphalt. He stood before his living room wall like a gladiator facing a mildly inconvenient curtain. His wife had specifically begged him to hire a professional crew, to which he scoffed, loudly claiming his bold interior design vision couldn't be contained by bureaucratic building codes. To grasp the sheer magnitude of his impending eviction from the gene pool, we need a quick lesson in residential infrastructure. Walls aren't just empty wooden boxes, they are the vascular system of a home, actively pumping electricity, water, and highly pressurized, incredibly explosive natural gas. Slicing blindly into an unknown drywall cavity with a high RPM metal blade is essentially juggling live hand grenades while blindfolded on a tightrope. Unfazed by his lack of a stud finder, Gary yanked the pull cord, revved the massive two-stroke engine until the windows vibrated, and plunged the roaring, diamond-tipped blade directly into the dead center of the wall. He was aggressively aiming for his stylish archway, but what he actually found was the main high-capacity residential gas line. The saw's brutal teeth chewed instantly through the thick metal pipe, simultaneously releasing a massive jet of pressurized vapor and generating a spectacular shower of white-hot friction sparks. You don't need a chemistry degree to know that mixing highly concentrated explosive gas with a localized fireworks display inside a sealed environment is a terribly bad recipe. The rapidly expanding gas cloud caught the stray spark and detonated with a concussive shockwave that instantly leveled the entire structure. Gary's fervent dream of a spacious, airy living environment was realized in the most tragically literal way mathematically possible, as his living room was suddenly completely open to the sky. When the dust finally settled over the smoldering suburban crater, the local homeowners association merely mailed a scorched violation notice to his surviving brick mailbox, officially citing Gary for his spectacular failure to maintain the neighborhood's strictly mandated aesthetic of actually having a roof. 2. The narrow, wind-swept concrete courtyard separating two towering university apartment blocks was the daunting geographical obstacle that ultimately inspired a pair of profoundly lazy friends to completely rewrite the laws of common sense. Brad and Chad were the kind of wildly overconfident collegiate slackers who genuinely believed that their aggressive avoidance of minor physical exertion was a clear sign of untapped engineering genius. They lived in opposing 10th-floor apartments and were utterly exhausted by the grueling, 5-minute daily commute required to take the elevator down, walk 30 feet across the pavement, and take the opposite elevator back up to hang out. Their brilliantly idiotic solution to this mundane logistical nightmare was to construct a highly illegal, amateur rope bridge suspended 100 feet above the unforgiving concrete. To fully grasp the sheer mechanical stupidity of their impending aviation disaster, we must briefly discuss the unforgiving physics of dynamic tension and anchor loads. When you suspend a heavy human body in the dead center of a horizontally rigged line, it multiplies the stress on the anchor points exponentially, creating a massive amount of inward tension. Securing such a terrifying traverse requires industrial-grade climbing harnesses and structurally integrated steel anchor bolts. Chad and Brad, however, utilized 50 feet of heavily frayed, generic braided nylon rope from a discount hardware store, casually tying it around the decorative aluminum railings of their respective balconies using a series of chaotic, completely unidentifiable knots. Brad, being the significantly lighter of the two dim-witted pioneers, triumphantly shimmied across the terrifying gap first, cheering wildly from the opposite balcony. Emboldened by his friend's miraculous survival, Chad, who easily outweighed his buddy by a solid 80 pounds of cheap beer and campus pizza, eagerly straddled the balcony railing to begin his own perilous journey. As Chad awkwardly scooted his considerable mass toward the exact center of the makeshift bridge, the agonizing, high-pitched groaning of the overstressed nylon rope was completely ignored. Right as he reached the halfway point, dangling helplessly 10 stories in the air, the catastrophic failure occurred. The amateur knot securing the rope to his starting balcony finally surrendered to the immense mathematical pressure, instantly unraveling and releasing the tension. Chad didn't simply drop straight down to the pavement. The rope remained firmly attached to Brad's balcony, instantly transforming his screaming friend into a colossal, fleshy pendulum. Powered by the unyielding acceleration of gravity, Chad swung across the dizzying urban chasm in a terrifying, sweeping arc. His spectacular, high-altitude transit came to an abrupt, deafening halt as he slammed face-first into the solid brick facade of the opposing building at a bone-shattering speed that no human ribcage was engineered to absorb. The brutal impact instantly knocked him unconscious, causing his sweaty hands to release their desperate grip on the nylon lifeline. Chad's brief, majestic career as an amateur tightrope walker ended with a catastrophic, unobstructed 10-story freefall to the courtyard pavement, definitively proving to the surviving roommate that taking the stairs is historically much better for your overall structural integrity. 3. Bryce was a man who suffered from a fatal confusion between video game physics and actual reality. He was the sort of arrogant vacationer who genuinely believed that dominating his friends at digital racing games automatically imbued him with the seasoned reflexes of a professional motorcycle racer. This delusion led him to the aggressive mountains of northern Thailand. Arriving in the country with zero actual riding experience, he immediately scoffed at the perfectly reasonable idea of taking a guided taxi, instead marching into a shady roadside rental shop to acquire the absolute cheapest 125cc moped legally available. When the exasperated local agent attempted to hand him a heavily scratched helmet and briefly explain the life-saving difference between the left and right brake levers, Bryce confidently waved him off, claiming protective headgear would completely ruin his curated vacation aesthetic. To grasp the catastrophic vehicular physics of Bryce's impending plunge, one must deeply understand the golden rule of two-wheeled mountain descents. The front brake provides your stopping power, but grabbing it forcefully while hurtling down an incline shifts 100% of your momentum violently forward, overloading the front tire. Completely ignorant of this mechanical reality, Bryce aggressively twisted the throttle and rocketed up the mountain, thoroughly enjoying the warm tropical breeze right up until he crested the jagged peak and encountered a terrifying 15% downhill grade, feeding into a blind, cliffside hairpin turn with zero guardrails. Gravity, an unyielding force that cares absolutely nothing for a tourist's misplaced self-esteem, instantly took total control of the tiny scooter, accelerating Bryce to a terrifying speed that vastly exceeded his microscopic skill level. Staring wide-eyed at the rapidly approaching edge of a 300-foot tropical abyss, raw panic completely overrode whatever shred of logic remained in Bryce's brain. Instead of gently feathering the rear brake lever to stabilize the chassis and bleed off speed, his terrified right hand clamped down on the front brake with the white-knuckled grip strength of a startled gorilla. The scooter's front tire instantly locked up tight, violently biting hard into the sun-baked asphalt. The massive forward momentum, having nowhere else to go, violently pivoted around the locked front axle, transforming the entire cheap moped into a high-speed catapult. Bryce was violently ejected from the faux leather seat, launched over the handlebars in a soaring arc that briefly gave him a spectacular, unobstructed panoramic view of the rocky valley far below. His impromptu aviation career ended with a devastating introduction to the jagged boulders at the very bottom of the ravine, permanently concluding his tropical getaway. The rental agency simply charged his family's credit card for the scratched paint on their recovered scooter, proving international damage deposits are absolutely non-refundable. 4. The sun-baked asphalt of an abandoned industrial park on a mundane Tuesday afternoon served as the modern coliseum for aspiring internet celebrities. And for a hyper-caffeinated amateur stuntman named Kyle, it was the perfect stage for his final permanent performance. Kyle's entire professional stunt reel consisted entirely of poorly framed social media clips and a staggering, fundamental inability to comprehend basic kinetic physics. He suffered from a severe cinematic delusion, genuinely believing that the breathtaking car-hopping sequences he idolized in blockbuster action franchises were achieved through pure, unadulterated grit rather than invisible wirework, complex mathematical choreography, and massive corporate insurance policies. Driven by a desperate, insatiable need for viral validation, Kyle convinced two of his equally dense buddies to drive a pair of dented sedans in a tight, staggered formation down the empty straightaway, with the second car trailing just a few feet behind the first at a brisk 45 miles per hour. His masterstroke of a plan was to climb out the passenger window of the first vehicle, stand triumphantly on the hood, and majestically leap across the asphalt chasm onto the roof of the second moving car. Now, to fully appreciate the monumental scale of his impending vehicular demise, we need a quick lesson in aerodynamic drag and surface friction. Standing upright on the curved, polished metal surface of a vehicle traveling at highway speeds transforms a human body into a clumsy, fleshy sail, actively fighting against a relentless wall of solid wind. Furthermore, car hoods are specifically aerodynamically sloped and notoriously slick, offering the exact opposite of a stable launchpad. Completely ignoring these unyielding laws of the universe, Kyle dramatically hauled his torso out of the window, immediately getting violently buffeted by the roaring wind. He somehow managed to plant his sneakers on the vibrating metal hood, striking a heroic pose for his buddy filming from the back seat. Shouting an incomprehensible battle cry, Kyle coiled his legs and attempted to launch himself across the gap. However, instead of achieving the graceful, soaring arc of a Hollywood leading man, his sweaty rubber soles instantly lost all traction on the glossy, sloped steel. His majestic leap immediately devolved into a catastrophic, flailing slip. He didn't jump over the gap. He simply tumbled backward directly into it, completely vanishing beneath the undercarriage of the second vehicle, trailing just inches behind him. The trailing driver, whose reaction time was severely compromised by sheer panic and a chronic lack of driving skills, didn't even have a fraction of a second to hit the brakes. Kyle was instantly introduced to the brutal, unforgiving reality of 2 tons of rolling automotive steel, fundamentally realizing far too late that while Hollywood relies on highly trained editors to cut away from a bad take, real life strictly utilizes coroners. The surviving camera footage did eventually go viral, but not as a stunt reel. Instead, it became a permanent, pixelated reminder of why Hollywood studios hire trained professionals, and not guys whose only qualification is yelling "watch this" to a camera. 5. Have you ever paid actual money for someone to confidently poison you in the middle of the woods? Because that's exactly the premium educational experience a group of trusting amateur hikers received from a rugged, self-proclaimed wilderness guru named Todd, who was about to deliver the absolute most effective seminar of his entire, shockingly short life. Todd was the kind of militant survivalist who unironically wore full tactical urban camouflage to the local hardware store and viewed modern grocery supermarkets as a pathetic crutch for the soft, domesticated masses. His entire personality was built upon a foundation of aggressive outdoor superiority, and he regularly charged gullible urbanites exorbitant fees to march them into the woods and lecture them on the forgotten arts of ancestral foraging. On this particular Saturday, Todd was leading a highly attentive group of amateur hikers. actively determined to prove that Mother Nature's bounty was vastly superior to anything found in a heavily regulated produce aisle. To fully comprehend the catastrophic botanical blunder Todd was about to commit, one must understand the absolute golden rule of foraging. If you cannot identify a plant with 100% undeniable certainty, you leave it completely alone. The forest floor is littered with incredibly deceptive flora, where a harmless snack and a botanical bioweapon frequently share remarkably similar visual characteristics. Striding confidently ahead of his note-taking students, Todd's eyes locked onto a cluster of tall plants with delicate, umbrella-like white flowers growing near a muddy creek. Eager to demonstrate his unrivaled mastery over the wild landscape, he loudly announced he had discovered a pristine patch of wild parsnips, the ultimate nutrient-dense superfood of the forest. Without pausing for even a fraction of a second to examine the specific leaf structure, the purple-mottled stem, or the overall growth pattern of the shrub, Todd aggressively yanked the thick roots straight out of the dirt. He wasn't holding a snack. He was gripping a massive, lethal dose of water hemlock, universally recognized by botanists as the single most violently toxic plant in North America. While a wild parsnip is a delightful summer treat, water hemlock is practically bursting with cicotoxin, a devastating neurotoxin specifically designed by nature to completely hijack and destroy the human central nervous system. Brimming with arrogant pride, Todd shoved the unwashed root directly into his mouth, chewing loudly and swallowing the toxic payload while simultaneously lecturing his horrified audience on the pure, untainted energy of the forest. His smug sense of botanical superiority lasted exactly as long as it took for the lethal neurotoxin to aggressively breach his bloodstream. The educational lecture was abruptly cut short as Todd violently collapsed into the dirt he so dearly loved, instantly thrown into a series of massive, unstoppable, and entirely fatal neurological seizures. He achieved a terrifyingly permanent state of harmony with the ecosystem, successfully providing his traumatized students with an incredibly vivid, unforgettable masterclass on why relying on an arrogant guy in cargo pants is never a viable substitute for a well-researched field guide. 6. Consider the majestic arrogance of a man who looks at millions of years of predatory evolution and thinks he can conquer it with a quick cuddle. Enter Simon, a disgraced former animal handler fired because he treated his facility's safety manual like a collection of mild, highly ignorable suggestions. Simon suffered from a terminal case of Disney protagonist syndrome. He was convinced he possessed a mystical connection with nature's most volatile beasts. He firmly believed wild primates were simply misunderstood, furry toddlers trapped in incredibly muscular bodies, just waiting for the right empathetic human to offer them a warm embrace. His ultimate fatal delusion centered around a resident of a highly secure private primate sanctuary, a colossal 400-pound alpha male chimpanzee named Brutus. Simon had briefly interacted with the animal years prior and unilaterally decided they were interspecies soulmates. Driven by a wildly misplaced sense of nostalgia and a burning desire to prove his former bosses wrong, Simon decided a midnight break-in was the only logical way to rekindle this non-existent friendship. Let's briefly dive into the terrifying reality of chimpanzee physiology and psychology. These creatures possess muscle fibers exponentially denser than ours, giving them the explosive physical strength of 5 heavily caffeinated professional linebackers. Furthermore, their complex communication relies heavily on facial expressions, and this is exactly where Simon's cross-species linguistic skills catastrophically failed him. In the human realm, pulling your lips back to reveal a gleaming set of pearly whites is a universal gesture of joy. In the savage hierarchy of a wild primate enclosure, baring your teeth is the ultimate, unmistakable declaration of total, violent war. Ignorant of this crucial biological translation, Simon hopped the perimeter fence under the cover of darkness, bypassing multiple signs that explicitly warned of a rapid, forceful exit from the gene pool. He crept into the habitat just as the massive alpha was enjoying a late-night raw meat snack. Striding out of the shadows with the unearned confidence of a motivational speaker, Simon threw his arms wide open for a loving reunion and intentionally stretched his face into a massive, exaggerated teeth-baring grin. He probably expected a heartwarming cinematic montage. Instead, Brutus dropped his snack, stared directly at the aggressively smiling intruder, and interpreted the facial gesture exactly as his ancient DNA commanded, a hostile rival challenging his absolute dominance. The towering chimp didn't casually accept the challenge. He rapidly escalated it to a masterclass in primal brutality. The ensuing interaction wasn't a heartwarming hug, but rather a terrifyingly swift demonstration of exactly why humanity originally invented reinforced steel cages. Simon's delusional attempt at diplomacy was rejected with face-altering, bone-crushing finality, converting Simon from a rogue animal whisperer into a cautionary obituary permanently pinned to the sanctuary's front gate. When the sanctuary's board reviewed the security footage the next morning, they didn't even bother updating their safety protocols. They collectively realized that absolutely no amount of barbed wire can save a man who mistakes a biological threat display for a photo op. 7. The midnight heist is an art form requiring meticulous planning, none of which applied to a remarkably inept local thief named Chester. Chester's criminal record was a long testament to consistently making the worst possible decision at every available crossroad of his life. His motivational engine was driven by immediate, unthinking impulse, making him a helpless slave to his own lack of basic self-control. At 2 in the morning, Chester executed a tactical infiltration of a neighborhood bakery, armed with a rusty crowbar and an aggressive late-night craving for carbohydrates. He jimmied the back door open, fully expecting to walk away with a cash register overflowing with pastry profits. However, upon violently prying open the till, he was greeted by the mocking emptiness of a few sticky pennies. Most self-respecting criminals would accept the humiliating defeat and slink back into the shadows. Chester, however, felt a profound sense of entitlement. If he couldn't walk away with cash, he was absolutely going to illegally compensate himself with unauthorized baked goods. Prowling through the pitch-black prep kitchen, his eyes locked onto a massive, unmarked burlap sack sitting enticingly in the corner of the pantry. To truly understand the magnitude of his impending biological doom, one must quickly grasp the insidious basics of commercial pest control. Exterminators don't catch city rats by politely asking them to leave. They deploy industrial-strength powdered pesticides that, in bulk form, bear a disturbingly close visual resemblance to ordinary baking ingredients, specifically designed to be consumed without suspicion by their intended vermin targets. In the dim lighting, Chester greedily scooped up a massive handful of the fine white powder, shoved it directly into his mouth, and immediately registered the intensely sweet flavor profile on his tongue. Bypassing any logical thought process that might question why premium baking ingredients were stored in an unlabeled sack right next to the dirty mop bucket, he instantly assumed he had hit the culinary jackpot. Deciding to indulge in a spontaneous powdered sugar buffet in the dark, Chester eagerly consumed several heaping handfuls of the mysterious substance, practically bathing his face in the lethal dust. He was treating a military-grade rodenticide like it was the sugary prize at the bottom of a cereal box. The tragically sweet payload rapidly absorbed into his bloodstream, introducing a devastating chemical cascade his internal organs were vastly unprepared to negotiate. The toxic cocktail systematically shut down his biological functions with ruthless efficiency, transforming his late-night sugar rush into a permanent, fatal metabolic crash. When the head baker arrived at dawn to begin kneading the sourdough, he didn't find a shadowy criminal mastermind fleeing the scene. Instead, he discovered Chester sprawled awkwardly on the cold linoleum, his face heavily dusted in toxic white powder, looking exactly like a tragic mime who had comprehensively lost a physical altercation with a powdered donut. The local police officially summarized the bizarre incident as the only known commercial burglary where the perpetrator successfully managed to exterminate himself, graciously saving the taxpayers the cost of a trial and permanently resolving the bakery's pest problem in one incredibly stupid swoop. 8. For a violently stubborn suburban homeowner named Frank, a clogged bathroom sink wasn't just a mild inconvenience, it was a direct challenge to his masculinity. Frank operated on the flawed philosophy that hiring a professional plumber was a scam for weak men, and that any mechanical problem could be solved by applying excessive brute force until the issue either miraculously resolved itself or completely disintegrated. Facing a slow drain thoroughly packed with matted hair and toothpaste sludge, Frank bypassed standard pipe cleaners in favor of an industrial-grade jug of 93% pure, undiluted sulfuric acid. He strutted arrogantly into the bathroom and recklessly upended the entire gallon of flesh-eating liquid directly into the porcelain basin, fully expecting the dense clog to instantly melt away like a cheap special effect. However, the calcified blockage held incredibly firm, trapping a bubbling, highly concentrated pool of raw liquid acid right in the U-bend of the pipe. Watching the foul-smelling puddle stubbornly refuse to budge, Frank's legendary impatience boiled over into highly irrational anger. Deciding that the laws of chemistry simply needed a severe physical beatdown to function properly, he retrieved a heavy-duty, galvanized steel plumbing snake and forcefully shoved the thick metal coil straight down through the standing pool of unyielding acid. To comprehend the horrifying facial reconstruction Frank was inadvertently scheduling, we need a brief lesson in violent exothermic reactions. When you aggressively introduce raw, uncoated steel directly into a concentrated pool of sulfuric acid, it triggers an instantaneous, highly volatile reaction that rapidly generates massive amounts of flammable hydrogen gas while superheating the corrosive liquid well past its boiling point. The second the metal auger violently scraped against the inside of the acid-filled trap, the reaction flashed into absolute overdrive. Inside the confined space of the PVC pipe, the rapidly expanding, boiling gas had absolutely nowhere to go but straight back up. As Frank leaned his face directly over the drain hole to angrily peer into the darkness, the plumbing pipe essentially transformed into a highly pressurized chemical mortar tube. The trap violently erupted with a deafening crack, blasting a high-velocity geyser of boiling, black corrosive liquid and searing toxic vapor point-blank into Frank's face. The involuntary gasp of pure shock caused him to deeply inhale the superheated, highly acidic steam directly into his respiratory system. The corrosive vapor instantly overwhelmed his lungs, causing massive, irreversible respiratory failure before he could even attempt to escape the bathroom. As he choked on the searing vapor, his body violently spasmed backward, causing his boots to slip on the wet tile. He launched backward and slammed the base of his skull squarely against the sharp granite edge of the bathtub, ensuring a permanent, albeit messy, solution to his domestic plumbing woes. 9. The human survival instinct is a powerful biological program designed to keep you breathing. But for a hyper-competitive biohacker named Troy, it was just another weakness to be crushed. Troy was the kind of exhausting, protein powder-snorting alpha bro who measured his entire self-worth in grueling physical challenges and listened exclusively to aggressive fitness podcasts hosted by men who screamed about dominating the morning routine. He had recently become dangerously obsessed with the fringe sport of extreme, competitive breath-holding, viewing his body's natural biological need for oxygen not as a crucial life-saving evolutionary trait, but as a pathetic, embarrassing weakness that needed to be ruthlessly conquered through sheer willpower. Training utterly alone in his backyard, under the cover of darkness to avoid distractions, Troy grew increasingly infuriated by the fact that his incredibly muscular, heavily conditioned frame naturally wanted to float back to the surface whenever his burning lungs began begging for air. He decided that the absolute only way to truly shatter his personal best record was to completely eliminate this buoyant distraction through the aggressive application of raw, unyielding heavy metal. Marching purposefully into his garage gym, he grabbed a massive 45-pound cast iron Olympic weightlifting plate, a thick length of heavy industrial steel chain, and a heavy-duty brass padlock. To truly understand the sheer scale of his impending aquatic doom, one must deeply grasp the unforgiving physics of water displacement and dead weight. The average human body is relatively buoyant, but securely locking 45 pounds of solid iron directly to your center of gravity permanently and irrevocably overrides any biological ability to swim upward. Troy hauled the massive iron plate to the edge of the deep end, wrapped the heavy steel chain tightly around his waist, and snapped the thick brass padlock shut, realizing a split second too late that he had absent-mindedly left the only key sitting on a nearby patio chair, completely out of reach. Taking a series of deep, hyperventilating breaths to saturate his blood, he confidently stepped off the tiled ledge, instantly sinking straight to the 9-foot bottom like a mafia informant wearing concrete shoes. He settled onto the cool pool tiles, crossed his legs into a meditative lotus position, and stared blankly at the underwater pool light, absolutely thrilled with his genius training hack. For the first 2 minutes, he was in a state of zen-like alpha dominance. However, as the carbon dioxide rapidly built up in his bloodstream, triggering the primal, unstoppable biological panic reflex to desperately breach the surface, reality finally broke through his arrogant delusion. As his lungs screamed in agonizing protest, Troy instinctively tried to kick upward, only to discover that human legs are spectacularly ill-equipped to tread water while securely shackled to an Olympic barbell plate. The crushing weight anchored him firmly and permanently to the bottom, and with the key sitting uselessly on the dry patio furniture 10 feet above his head, he had absolutely zero leverage to free himself from his own brilliant invention. Troy undeniably shattered his personal best endurance record that tragic night by remaining completely submerged for over 8 consecutive hours, achieving an ultimate eternal state of permanent relaxation before the horrified pool boy discovered his perfectly anchored corpse the following morning. 10. Meet Logan. Logan was the type of aspiring influencer who viewed the entire natural world not as a delicate ecosystem, but as a disposable green screen for his heavily filtered content. His existence was dedicated to viral fame, and his lack of respect for safety was eclipsed only by his ignorance of hydraulic force. Wandering recklessly along a dangerous stretch of lava rock coastline, Logan spotted a massive natural blowhole, a subterranean volcanic tube connected to the surging ocean below. The area was surrounded by visible warning signs detailing the gruesome deaths of previous tourists. Logan, however, interpreted these government warnings as an exclusive VIP invitation for premium content. Deciding that filming the water wasn't impressive enough, he armed himself with a cheap $15 foam boogie board. His catastrophically stupid master plan was to physically straddle the rocky opening and use the flimsy styrofoam to plug the blowhole right before a giant swell rolled in, attempting to create a human-powered cork pop for the camera. To appreciate the violence of Logan's impending launch, we need a lesson in high-pressure fluid dynamics. When millions of gallons of surging ocean water are violently compressed into a narrowing volcanic tunnel, the resulting upward force is incomprehensible. Trying to stop a geological hydraulic cannon with cheap foam is the mathematical equivalent of trying to stop a freight train with a wet napkin. Ignoring the screams of onlookers, Logan hopped the safety fence, marched onto the slick rock, and proudly slapped his board over the dark, hissing hole. The ocean slowly drew back, creating a terrifying vacuum in the cavern below, right before the mother of all rogue swells crashed into the underwater cave entrance. The immense pressure built instantly, seeking the path of least resistance. The enraged Pacific didn't even register Logan's pathetic blockade. It simply sneered at his foam board, blasting the plastic into confetti and violently launching Logan over 30 feet straight up into the tropical sky. He was ejected with the force of an artillery shell, flailing wildly like a fleshy champagne cork. Gravity quickly reasserted its dominance, and Logan accelerated toward the jagged earth at a speed that left absolutely zero room for a miracle. He bypassed the safety of the water entirely, plummeting headfirst toward the razor-sharp lava rocks surrounding the blowhole. The devastating impact proved instantly fatal upon contact, permanently concluding his quest for internet fame and effectively upgrading his status from aspiring influencer to a permanent, bloody cautionary tale for the island's tourism board. 10 people, 10 catastrophic errors in judgment, and 10 permanent exits from the gene pool. It's genuinely impressive how fast life turns off when you completely ignore the laws of physics. Comment below, which one of these 10 legends do you think deserves the title of the absolute king of stupidity, and what was the one red flag they ignored the most? I want to see you roast them in the comments. Hit like if you've survived today, and subscribe so you don't end up on my next list.